Hello, everybody. My name is Patrick, and this is my list of my 12 favorite albums of 2017. So far, we've gone through and talked about albums 12 through 5. And in this video, we're going to be finishing the list off and talking about albums 4 through 1. So we are deep into the nitty-gritty now. The best, in my opinion, the best 4 albums of 2017. So let's get started. Number 4 on my list, Spirit by Depeche Mode. Now, a lot of people know who Depeche Mode is, but a surprising number of people don't. If you're one of the people who don't, I would say that this is actually a pretty good album to start with. I will also say, though, that Depeche Mode, more than almost any other band I know, it really is important to kind of experience their entire catalog in order to fully understand their music. And I don't mean on like some sort like comprehending it on some sort of like a spiritual level or connection or something. Like, I really do feel like their music has so greatly influenced electronic music and just pop music and music in general over the last 30 years or so that it is important to know and understand where they started and where they kind of went through and the different evolutions of their band. So I do recommend starting with this album if you're not a fan of theirs, because I do think it has a lot of mass appeal right now, but also I do think that it's important to go back and listen to their old catalog. So if you are a fan of Depeche Mode, though, this album continues in the direction that they've been going for the last few albums. It's very dirty and gritty, and there's a lot more blues influence on this album than in previous albums. Martin Gore actually plays the guitar a lot more on this album than he has in previous albums, and I love it. I love all the things that they're doing with this. Dave Gahan's vocals are more distorted than they've ever been on this album, and distorted in a good way. In fact, some of the songs actually have the frequency that the distortion is coming from is the frequency of the song, and not a lot of bands could get away with that, and it actually works for this. The songs have more of a general sort of rock feel and a bit less of an electronic feel, and I think that stems from the fact that they are using more analog machines, which they have been doing for several albums now. They're using more analog machines, and they're using a bit less of the sort of like bleeps and bloops as general sort of percussive things. Like there's never like a shaker or something in a Depeche Mode song. They've had a lot of bleeps and bloops, whereas in this album, there are some songs that have what sound like real drums on them, which is a cool thing. Also, I will say this is definitely Depeche Mode's heaviest album. Only in their entire 30-year career, I would say maybe they've only ever had 2 or 3 songs that I would consider heavy, whereas this album has several moments that are pretty heavy, and I love it. I think that it's great. The bluesiness, the heaviness, the dirtiness is all really good and continuing the style that they've sort of built on the last several albums. Delta Machine, which is their previous album that came out 4 years ago. For those of you who don't know, Depeche Mode has been on a 4-year cycle since I think 1992 or something. They release an album every 4 years, so it's like clockwork. You know when one's coming out, and so I knew that there was going to be one coming out this year, and I was excited for it because I love their last album, Delta Machine, which went very deep into the bluesy sort of analog distortion that their previous album had gone into a little bit, but this album continues that from Delta Machine going into as far as you can into it. I am really excited to see what they come up with next, but I don't want to think about that because I'm still really enjoying this album. It's great. I actually think that it might be my favorite Depeche Mode album. If you talk to a lot of Depeche Mode fans, a lot of people think that their music has been getting worse as they've been getting old, and if not necessarily worse, that their newer music isn't as good as their older music from the specifically a lot of people like their early 90s music and their mid to late 80s music. I think that they're making the best music of their career right now. I think that they're being absolutely incredible. Lyrically, this album is really good. I think it hits on a lot of points that they talk about a lot of the things that have been happening over the last 2 years, dealing with political things and social things and culture, and it even talks about video games and things that are just in the zeitgeist right now in a way that doesn't feel too preachy. And if you don't agree with what they are saying or are necessarily thinking about basically out loud, it doesn't feel like you can't like the music because they're talking about something that you don't agree with. It's very welcoming in that sense. That being said, there's some of the poppiest stuff they've written in recent years is on this album. I think the best stuff that they did on Delta Machine, they've basically sort of taken the best stuff from Delta Machine and made it sort of the central focus of Spirit, and I think it really worked on all fronts. So that's my number 4 favorite album of the year, Spirit by Depeche Mode. If you have not heard a Depeche Mode album, I recommend starting with this one, but don't disregard the rest of their catalog because I do think that's important to understand. So that's Depeche Mode. So now, number 3, and I have to say, I said it in the previous video, the top 3 albums for this year are absolutely incredible to me, and I think that they will all be in my favorite albums of all time. So this next album, number 3 for me this year, was very hard, and it sat at number 2 for a majority of the year. This is the album, let's see, how do you pronounce it? Miyaku Haku, I'll say that. I don't speak Japanese, unfortunately. Miyaku Haku, by the band Mook, M-U-C-C. I've never met anybody else that knows this band, so you listening to this probably don't know who this is. Mook is a Japanese metal band, and saying that does is a strong disservice to them because they are so much more than just being a Japanese metal band, but I feel at their core that's what they are. They have whole albums in their catalog, which is, I believe this is their 14th album. They have whole albums in their catalog that are not metal at all, that are sort of punky or poppy or electronic. And then they have, even on their heaviest albums, every album has songs that are just acoustic songs or electronic songs. Or their last 3 albums, they've gone into doing a jazz song or a couple jazz songs in the middle of an album. So they'll just... It's like the guitar player sets his guitar down and goes and sits at the piano, and then they've got this incredible piano playing and upright bass and really cool guitar solos and things like that, and they become a jazz band for a little while. But the thing is, even though that the genres within their albums span such a wide there's such wide margins. Everything is so accessible and so easily consumed. A lot of Japanese bands have this sort of chaotic, we can do anything we want in the middle of a song. Let's go from this genre to this genre to this genre within their music. But Mook is, in my opinion, the best because all their songs feel cohesive within each individual song. And then it's just from song to song on any individual album that you don't know what you're going to get. You could get a ballad one track, and then the next track be the hardest, heaviest, most metal song you've ever heard, and then have the next song be auto-tune turned up to 11 pop vocals. You know, it's kind of crazy. So with that in mind, I love Mook. They are one of my favorite bands of all time. This album is their best album. It's their best album. It's their 14th album, and it's their best album. It's incredible. I prefer the heavier side of Mook, and that's definitely what this is. This is their heaviest album. Their heaviest album in itself, like as a whole. I think they maybe have a couple heavier songs than the heaviest song on this album is. But that being said, this album is very heavy. So this album is basically, I guess it's so hard for me to explain it, but I don't speak Japanese, but I still enjoy very much listening to music in languages other than English. I don't speak any language other than English. And one of the reasons I like listening to foreign language music is that it kind of frees you from having to relate to a song or try to understand the meaning of it, and you can just kind of hear the vocals as another instrument in the song. And that's one of the things that I like about Japanese music, and Mook in particular, is that there's so much to like about it, and it's so different and so unique compared to anything in the United States, but they keep everything within the confines and the borders of understanding a general song. Like, it's not just this part goes into this part, goes into this part, and nothing feels connected. Everything feels connected. They'll do a chorus in a song multiple times, but maybe under the chorus they'll do slightly different music each time, though the vocals stay the same. So you can still look at the road map, look at the road ahead of you as the song's playing, and figure out where you're going. But instead of just like flipping a 180 and going the other direction, or zooming off in outer space, you're staying on the same road. There's just a lot of really cool different things to look at. It's like going from a snowy road to the Rocky Mountains to the desert, if that makes sense. But it's the same road. It's a really weird, vague way to say that, I know, but it's hard to explain. But that's the most important thing to me about this band. They are so unique and so different and so fun to listen to. And fun is a really important word. Their music isn't all happy and fun. Some of it's very dark, and some of it's heavy, and some of it's scary. Some of it is poppy and dancey and fun and anime-like. But that's the point of it. It's so varied and unique and different that it just is absolutely wonderful. And if I could I always constantly have music running in my head. And if I could take the music that was in my head and suck it out with some sort of a wonderful machine, I think that it would sound a lot like this, but with English lyrics. And I don't think the Japanese is a negative, but I know just like some people don't like to watch subtitled movies, a lot of people don't like to listen to music that's not in English. I recommend giving this a try, though. If you like heavy music, if you like interesting music, please give Mook a shot. And I think it's pronounced Mook. I've never heard anyone say it out loud. But please give them a shot and start with this album. Unless you don't like heavy music, in which case you just want to listen to this sort of more interesting stuff that they do, I would maybe recommend their last album, or maybe even their album before that, which is quite a bit more poppy. And I can't remember the names of their albums off the top of my head because it's hard for me to pronounce even the names of their albums. But my favorite Mook song of all time is on this album. It's called Killer. It's track number 4. And if you just want to look that up, I think that's a great representation of this band as a whole. So that's my number 3 for 2017, Mook, with the album Mayaku Haku. Mayaku Haku. Yeah, anyway. So that brings us to number 2, and this is the biggest surprise of the year for me. My number 2 favorite album of 2017 is the album Synthesis by Evanescence. And I am not one of the Evanescence haters out there. A lot of people do not like Evanescence, and I think that kind of stems from the fact that they got so popular. They reached outside of their sort of box, and people don't like it when bands do that sometimes. It's kind of like a Nickelback type of thing. Nickelback was so popular for a while, it became the popular thing to hate Nickelback. And I feel like the Evanescence, to a somewhat smaller degree, had that same problem. But let's ignore that. I've always been a fan of Evanescence. I have all 3 of their previous albums. I like all 3 of their previous albums for different reasons. I'm a much bigger fan of the music after Amy Lee kind of went off on her own and Ben Moody left the band after their first album. I think that their second album is their best album, but her third album is interesting because it sounds like a band sat down and wrote an album together, whereas her second album is much more of just her sitting at her piano, writing the songs, and then kind of crafting the songs around her vision. This album is not even an original album. This is, there are 16 tracks on this album, and I think all total, there's a few instrumental tracks and things. I think all total there's 12 or 13 full songs on here, and I think of the 12 or 13, there's only 1 or 2 original songs that are new. The rest of them are all just orchestral and electronic reimaginings of basically a greatest hits of Evanescence music. So you've got all the songs you would expect. You've got, of course, the big ones like Bring Me to Life and My Immortal, but then you also have like Never Go Back. High Low is one of the sort of newer ones that I believe was a song she wrote for a movie soundtrack that came out a little while ago, and it actually features Lindsey Sterling with a violin solo. And then the big song off of here is Imperfection, which is a new one that they released, which is, I like the idea of the song, but it's not as good as the rest of the album. But anyway, I'm rambling about it. This album is special because it is an experience. This is a sit down with the best quality audio equipment you have, whether it's giant speakers like these or really good headphones. This is sit in the quiet and listen to this masterpiece of an album. And I do not use that word lightly. This album is an absolute musical masterpiece. It is, without a doubt, the most beautiful album as a whole I've ever heard. It is. The orchestra is recorded so well, and I work at a recording studio where a large portion of what we do is go to buildings around town and record orchestras and choirs and things, and I'm not an expert whatsoever. I cannot read sheet music, and I've never been in a chorus my entire life, but you can just listen to this and you know that it's special. You know that it was recorded very well, as good as it could possibly be recorded. And then the electronics were all added by the guy that was her partner on this album, and I don't know who that is off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I did not look. But it is so well put together. The electronics do not sound dissonant or separate from the acoustic orchestra or the choirs and things. The electronic elements fit so well with what this music was made for. It was made to be orchestra and electronics. There's no guitar on this album. It does not feel heavy like a rock band. That is not what this is. This is going from song to song to song to song, having orchestration be the priority, and then her vocal, which is just for in almost all cases on the album, each song, her vocals are center and dry and just there and bare and out in front of everybody. And the mix is so wonderful. The orchestra wraps around her vocals but never gets in the way, and the electronic elements are sparse but still cutting enough that everything works together. It is so beautiful. This album is so beautiful and so wonderful. Any human being on the planet, I would recommend this to. If you are not a fan of Evanescence, please listen to this. It is not Evanescence like you think it is. If you're a fan of symphonic metal or symphonic rock like I am, this is the best symphonic rock-ish album I've ever heard, because what I've always wanted, I love bands like Nightwish and Epica and Within Temptation. I love those bands, and I like the big, heavy, bombastic stuff, but I love the ballads. I love stuff like Meadows of Heaven and Creek Mary's Blood from Nightwish. I love things like that, and this is basically a whole album of just that, but without the guitars and the guitar solos and things, which are great, but this is just it on another level. It's so unique and so different and so wonderful, and no matter what you're into, please do yourself a favor and check this out. Evanescence was big enough that no matter who you are listening to this, you probably know some of their songs, and if you put this on and you listen to it, you'll know some of the melodies, you'll know some of what's happening, and it will feel like you've heard this music before, but it's being presented in such a new and awesome, incredible way. I hope that the music that she makes from now until the end of time is like this, but new original stuff. It sounds like a movie score to something like John Wick or something, with the electronic elements, a beat like a trip hop, almost hip hop beat over just these lush, beautiful strings. And the thing is, they keep the orchestral elements different enough throughout from song to song to song that every song feels special. There are songs that have like a bell section or something, and you can tell that they actually they brought in people with bells and they separated them, and you can hear the space that the orchestra was recorded in, and it's just so quiet and beautiful at times, but then it does get bombastic and it does get orchestral, big symphonic chorusy and score, like a symphony playing a score to a movie, like big stuff. It's all of that wrapped into one package, and it is just so beautiful and so perfect. So that's my number 2 album for the year. That is Evanescence. Now we are at the number 1 album of 2017, in my opinion. And this is going to be a hard one to talk about because it's so personal for me in terms of why I like it. I am a huge fan of a band that disbanded in 2013 called Kise's Orchestra. They are a Norwegian band from Oslo, I believe. And they are the only band I've ever heard that I believe every piece of music they've made is absolutely perfect. There is not one song or track I skip on any of their albums. I believe they had 7 albums. They're all absolutely perfect. It's hard to explain their style, but they base their music off of kind of traditional Norwegian polka stuff, but mixed with alternative rock, and there's a bit of like a grittiness to it, like a Black Keys type of thing, but they also don't shy away from making cool ballads with orchestras and things. The last album they made before they called it quits as a band, or at least retired for a while, was a trilogy of albums called Violetta Violetta, and I recommend looking them up. I think they're their 3 best albums. But Violetta Violetta Volume 1 and 2 were 2 albums that they worked on 2 years consecutively, releasing music that was kind of in the style of their past catalog, a bluesy sort of dirty rock, all sung in Norwegian, great vocal melodies with really cool lead guitar parts that are sort of separate guitar parts, one on the left, one on the right, both guitar players playing different sounding things that work really well together, upright bass, and then a drummer who's phenomenal as well. And then while they were making those 2 albums, they made an all orchestral album. And so that album previously, up until this very moment, this year, was my favorite album of all time. I think Violetta Violetta Volume 3 is absolutely incredible album. I have a poster of it that I actually ordered from Norway in my house in my living room. I love that album. I love everything about that band. They broke up in 2013, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because my number one favorite album of the year is the singer, Janove Ottensen. His first solo album is my favorite album of this year, and I'm going to say officially my favorite album of all time. Hopefully that gets beat someday, and then I will say that the next album that's my favorite album of all time is my favorite album of all time. But right now, and for as far as I can see in the future, this is the best music I've ever heard in my life. And I've heard a lot of music. And this album is incredible. Every song is great. There are 15 tracks on here, and every single song is worth the price of admission alone. It's absolutely incredible. And everything I said about Kise's Orchestra travels over into this. It is everything that I would want it to be. The thing that's the most special about this music is the way that it feels, is the way that it sounds, the way it's produced, the way it was recorded, using analog gear. And just there's like a looseness to it, but also like a collaborative feel to it. It feels like musicians got in the studio and got together and had fun making the song. But there's also, this album feels more electronic than the Kise's Orchestra stuff. It feels more programmed and more, I don't want to say thought out, but there's a bit more of a differentiating factor from song to song to song to song. There are keyboards, there are synths and things on this, but they all feel organic and they all feel acoustic and they all feel like they fit with the sort of distorted tremolo Italian movie score soundtrack style that Kise's Orchestra had. But that's all here, but it all works so well with the songs and the way the songs were written. A lot of his previous albums have been like thematic albums based on a specific story or something that he wrote. This album, I think, is the same thing, though I don't actually know. I've never bothered to look up the translations of any of these songs because I don't feel I need it. I like it just the way that it is without any understanding of it, the context of what's happening, because I love the way it sounds so much. Every song feels different from one another, but it all fits together so well. There are several slow, giant, epic songs that build and build and build and build to this wonderful climax that just really is satisfying. There are some songs that are just driving the whole time. And then he set out with the goal to try to make the album have a bit more of like a hip-hop flow to it, more of like a bouncy feel. And it does. It has that. There are certain songs on here that if you took his vocals out and you replaced them with like a rapper rapping over it, it would be like the greatest rap song of all time, in my opinion. It's such cool production, such wonderful sounds. Everything works so well together. Everything is so rounded. Nothing on this album is square or in your face. Everything is just put together in such a way that it is absolutely perfect. It's the most perfect album I've ever heard. Now, all that being said, it's so hard for me to recommend this to somebody because I just feel like this music was made for me. Like this music was made specifically for me. This is what I feel constantly. And it resonates with me so much, and I can't specifically point why. I mean, I can kind of in saying the way it sounds and the way that it's put together and the vocal melodies and everything, but I don't know what any of the songs are about. And I feel like most people, or at least a lot of people that I know, most people that I know, relate to music in a way that the lyrics are sort of the number one thing they listen to, and they try to get something from it because it means something. They have a personal connection to it or something like that. You can't get that with this unless you speak Norwegian. And I only know one or two Norwegian people. And I get that connection with this music more so than any music I think I've ever heard in my life. And I don't understand what it's about because I have no clue what it's about. So it's hard for me to recommend this. But at the same time, the moment you hear it, you know whether or not you like it. It's not like you listen to it and after a while it kind of grows on you. The moment you hear this, if you like it, you will like it. It will be turned up to 11. And if you hear it and you don't like it, then there's really no use in searching any further because this is what it is right on its sleeve. There's no hidden anything in this, at least as far as I'm concerned. I really don't know what else to say about it. I could talk about how wonderful it is forever, but it would all just be hyperbole almost, because it's all just so personal to me in terms of how much I like this. So I'll just end it there and say that's my number one album. It's called Artisten and Marlene. I don't know if I even mentioned that, but Artisten and Marlene by Janove. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Ottensen. And so that brings us to the end of these 3 videos. I think I mentioned it before in one of the other videos, but I've recorded so much now I don't remember. This year was wonderful. It was a great year, mostly because of the top 6 albums. I think that the first half of my list is really great and stacks up there against the best years of music that I've experienced in my 30 years of listening, of being on this earth. I think that the back half is a little bit disappointing. I was disappointed with things this year that I had high hopes for, which was very similar to last year with Blur's release and a couple of other things that came out last year, Modest Mouse. Some bands released albums last year that hadn't released albums in almost a decade, and it was exciting to get that, and then it came out and it was a little disappointing. And I feel like that's kind of the case this year with a couple things, with Lights and Gorillaz. But at the same time, we ended up getting a great Birthday Massacre album, which in my opinion is great since I love them so much. We got a Depeche Mode album, which is great. We got Evanescence, which blew my socks off, not expecting it and not knowing that that was going to be happening at all. We got probably my favorite foreign language album other than this one in this Mook album, this wonderful metal album. We got this wonderful album. We got cool swing metal. We got straight up metal. We got all sorts of cool stuff here. And I just want to end this video by saying that 2017 was great, and I hope that 2018 is even better. And it's looking like there's some cool stuff coming out next year already, and I'm excited for everything that's to come. It really frustrates me when people don't think that good music is coming out anymore, and that all the great music came out in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. That is absolutely not true. I believe in my heart that the best music is being made today, right now, and that everything moving forward we just need to look at positively and with anticipation, and I think we'll all appreciate it so much more if we look at it that way rather than trying to make music now sound like it did in the past. Like I said in the 2 previous videos, in the description of this video, I'll put a sample of a song from each of these, and I will try to put a link in there for the other 2 videos in case you didn't see that and just clicked on this. But for now, I'm going to sign out, say Happy New Year to everybody, and if you're watching this later, I hope you had a great 2017. I hope 2018 is doing great, and I'm sure it will. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Patrick.